Here we go, reading more of Zac Power Poison Island. We're up to chapter 8. "Step this way, Mr. Power," said Dr. Drastic. "Watch your head on the revolving bookcase." He was calm and polite, but icy. It was exactly how Zac's teachers sounded when someone tried the "dog ate my homework" line on them. Zac felt Dr. Drastic's hands on his shoulders. His bony fingers and sharp fingernails dug in hard, like claws. Zac knew there was no running away from a grip like that. "I knew you'd come sooner or later to save your brother," said Dr. Drastic. "Couldn't resist trying to make yourself a hero, could you, Zac?" Dr. Drastic's cold blue eyes locked with Zac's. There was something funny about the left one. Zac couldn't tell exactly what it was. All of a sudden, Dr. Drastic reached up and popped out his left eyeball altogether. He laid it in his palm and showed it to Zac. "It's glass. I lost my real eye a long time ago." Zac had never seen anything as gross as Dr. Drastic's glass eye, unless it was the empty socket where Dr. Drastic's real eye used to be. "Hasn't your mother ever told you it's rude to stare?" snapped Dr. Drastic. "Probably not. She's always too busy spying for GIB. He popped his glass eye back in and Zac sighed with relief. "I bet you hate being a spy," said Dr. Drastic, suddenly cunning. "You'd much rather make yourself popular with your friends. Being a spy doesn't make you look cool because you can't tell anyone about it, can you?" Zac nodded dumbly. How did Dr. Drastic know all this stuff about him? It made him feel weak and stupid all of a sudden. So that's what they mean by an evil genius, Zac thought. "Well, would you like to see Leon?" said Dr. Drastic. "Not to rescue him, of course, just to say hello." He sounded friendly again, as though he were asking Zac if he'd like a chocolate. A chocolate milkshake. His personality changed from nasty to friendly and back again every second minute. It's scarier than him being horrible all the time, Zac thought. Dr. Drastic strode over to a large silver door on the opposite side of the lab. He flung it open and inside Zac saw Leon. But Leon wasn't standing, or even sitting with his wrists bound together with a rope the way captives often are. Instead, Leon was frozen inside an enormous block of ice. The expression frozen on Leon's face wasn't one of pain or fear. His forehead was wrinkled and he had a finger pressed to his cheek. That's exactly how Leon looks when he's studying or concentrating very hard on something, thought Zac. Dr. Drastic slammed the freezer door shut. "Don't fret, Zac," said Dr. Drastic, patting Zac's cheek creepily. "I left an air bubble in the ice block. Leon's still alive." Relief flooded through Zac. If Leon was still alive, there was always a chance Zac could come up with a last-minute plan and save him, and maybe the formula for Solution X too. Zac looked around him. All the windows and doors in the lab looked really secure. Now break time was over. Dr. Drastic's assistants were everywhere. There was absolutely no way to escape. Zac's spirits sank again. "If I don't get my money, I'm going to destroy Solution X, you see," Dr. Drastic was saying. "And while I'm at it, I thought I'd do away with Leon here too." Dr. Drastic walked over to a model of the island in the very centre of the lab. "I'm going to drop them both into this volcano," Dr. Drastic said, pointing to a mountain on the model. The label stuck to the side read, "Mount Humble." Zac's mind went into overdrive. He knew there was a volcano on Poison Island, but it hadn't erupted for hundreds of years. "Ah, I see you're confused. Before you ask, Zac, yes, you're correct. Mount Humble is an extinct volcano, or rather, was an extinct volcano." Dr. Drastic picked up a jar of powder that looked like pepper from a nearby bench. "I call my latest invention eruption powder. It works like pepper on a human nose. I simply sprinkle it into the crater of an extinct volcano, triggering a kind of giant volcanic sneeze. And when the volcano's good and hot again, I'll drop in the formula for Solution X." "Along with Leon," said Zac grimly. "Correct," said Dr. Drastic. "And you too, now that you're here." He pulled a watch from a chain on his pocket of his lab coat. There was less than an hour until the deadline expired. "There's a car waiting to take us to Mount Humble," said Dr. Drastic, with an evil laugh. "I'm dying to hear that giant ice block sizzling in the hot lava, aren't you?" Chapter 9. Dr. Drastic's ute bumped along the rough jungle track towards Mount Humble. Zac's hands and feet were tied together with vines. He was squashed between Bruce and Dr. Drastic. Bradley was driving. The giant block of ice, with Leon still frozen inside, was tied down in the back. It was late at night now, but the jungle heat was still fierce. As sneakily as possible, Zac turned his head to get a better look at the block of ice. It seemed to be melting fast. Was it possible it might melt before they reached Mount Humble? "Do you fancy a little car game, Zac?" asked Dr. Drastic, not waiting for an answer. "I'll start. I spy with my little eye something beginning with the S." "Sweat," said Zac, looking at Bradley's stinky, sweaty armpits. The more he played along with Dr. Drastic's stupid games, the more time he'd have to dream up a rescue strategy. He had to be careful, though. Dr. Drastic would be expecting some kind of escape attempt. "Good try, but no," said Dr. Drastic. "S is for small boy trying to figure out how to rescue his brother and save the day." Bruce laughed nastily and poked Zac in the ribs. Zac sighed. "Give up, Zac. There is no escape. You won't be saving Leon. You're not getting the formula. It's O-V-E-R, said Dr. Drastic. "That spells over," said Bruce. At the worst possible time, Zac had really drawn a blank. He was all out of ideas. "Look, over there," cried Dr. Drastic. "It's Mount Humble." He clapped his hands with delight. The ute turned off the main track and started climbing steadily up the side of the volcano. Before long, the ute stopped. Dr. Drastic got out and ordered Bradley to unload the block of ice with Leon inside. Zac hopped along awkwardly. Walking wasn't easy with both feet tied together. Bradley hauled the block of ice over to the very edge of the volcano crater. Bruce was busy sprinkling something into the crater itself. Dr. Drastic watched Zac with amused eyes. "Yes, Zac, that's my eruption powder Bruce is sprinkling," said Dr. Drastic in his nastiest voice. He dug out his pocket watch and consulted it. "The volcano will erupt in 5 minutes, exactly when the deadline runs out." 5 minutes. Things were as desperate as they had ever been. And when the volcano erupts, I'll have Bradley push the ice block into the lava. Then you'll follow. And since I created it, I'm going to save the pleasure of destroying Solution X for myself. Dr. Drastic fumbled in the inside pocket of his lab coat. He pulled out a tiny jar of bright yellow liquid. "This is the last sample of Solution X," said Dr. Drastic. "I'm going to destroy this along with the formula." Dr. Drastic waved a piece of notepaper in Zac's face. "The formula. It makes me sad to destroy Solution X. It's my greatest invention, a cure for any disease or sickness ever known." Dr. Drastic sighed. "It's utterly magnificent, wouldn't you say, Zac?" But Zac wasn't listening. He was thinking about what Dr. Drastic had said. A cure for any disease or sickness ever known. Wasn't evil a kind of sickness, wondered Zac? Was it possible that Dr. Drastic's evilness might be cured by his very own invention? But suddenly Zac heard a loud gasping sound. It was coming from the volcano crater. "Ah! Ah! Ah!" The ground underneath him began to rumble and shake. A scalding hot stream hissed. Red-hot ash flew through the air. Achoo! It was the loudest sneeze Zac had ever heard. He knew at once what was happening. The volcano was erupting. Chapter 10. Everyone and everything anywhere near Mount Humble was trying to get away as fast as possible. Even the animals were escaping down the mountain any way they could. But not Dr. Drastic. He stood calm and silent on the edge of the volcano crater. He was holding up his tiny jar of Solution X. If only Zac could get a hold of that jar. If he was going to have any chance of that, first he'd need to break the vines that tied his wrists and ankles together. But with his hands tied together, there was no way Zac could reach his pocket knife. Just then, Zac felt something brush up against his feet. It was a rat, trying to escape the volcano. But unlike all the other animals, this rat wasn't running. It was fat and lazy, and its stomach dragged along the ground. It was just what Zac needed. He hopped carefully towards the rat. "Go on, chew off those vines," he willed it. The rat might have been lazy, but it definitely wasn't stupid. It recognised food when it saw it. It bit into the vines around Zac's ankles, then his wrists. In a few quick chews, Zac was free. Zac snuck up behind Dr. Drastic, who was still standing on the very edge of the volcano. It wouldn't have been the easiest thing in the world to push him in, but remembering the mission, Zac realised he couldn't. He still had to get Dr. Drastic to tell him the secret formula. Suddenly, Dr. Drastic drew his arm back. He was about to throw his jar of Solution X into the volcano. Zac sprang forward. He took a humongous jump. It was like a football superstar, as if in slow motion. Zac snatched into bed, Jesse. Back into bed, Jesse. The jar as it spun through mid-air. He cracked open the top and poured the whole lot over Dr. Drastic. For a second, Dr. Drastic just stood there with yellow goo dripping down his forehead. Then he spoke. His voice was nothing like the icy, terrifying voice he used before. Now he sounded friendly but slightly confused, like a grandpa woken too early from his nap. Bruce and Bradley rushed over to help. "What have you done to him, you moron?" asked Bruce, looking at Zac. "No, Bruce, that's okay. Zac's my friend," said Dr. Drastic. Bradley looked at Bruce, confused. This made no sense to him. Bruce just shrugged his shoulders. If the boss said Zac was his friend, then Zac was his friend as far as Bruce was concerned. "Don't you know you're in terrible danger, Zac? We're standing on top of a erupting volcano." Solution X had worked. Zac had cured Dr. Drastic's evilness. "I know," said Zac, "but I can't escape until you tell me the formula for Solution X." "Oh, well, that's easy. To the frog poison, you simply add," and he's rattled off a very long list of chemicals. Zac tried his hardest to memorise it. He thought he had it. "Now don't forget the most important ingredient. Sodium chloride," said Dr. Drastic. "Solution X won't work without aqueous sodium chloride. Good old seawater." A jet of steam whooshed out of the volcano. Zac nodded. He couldn't stand around for one more second memorising formulas. That would have to do. "How do we escape from here, Dr. Drastic?" asked Zac. "Take a hang glider. They're just over there. I've got plenty of spares," said Dr. Drastic. Zac raced over to the row of hang gliders. Then he remembered Leon. How was he going to rescue his brother when he was still frozen and solid in a block of ice? He looked over at Leon. Leon was waving to him. On the side facing the volcano, the ice block had melted enough to free Leon's arm. Zac grabbed hold of the hang glider. He took a big run up. Wind whooshed under the wings. Zac was flying. Whoosh! Oops. Where did we get to? Whoosh. Zac circled over the volcano, then swooped back down. Leon must have understood Zac's plan perfectly. As Zac flew overhead, Leon held his free arm up as high as he could. Zac grabbed his hand. The entire ice block lifted off the ground. "At last," Zac thought, "I've rescued Leon." But almost as soon as they were airborne, the hang glider began to drop downwards. Oh no, the block of ice was too heavy to fly. They were falling straight towards the volcano crater. The lower they fell, the hotter it got. They were dropping faster and faster. Leon's feet were almost in the lava, but just when Zac thought they would surely frizzle, the hang glider suddenly rose again. Up and up it climbed, right up out of the volcano crater. Zac looked down. Flying so deep into the volcano had melted the iceberg completely. Leon was free and the hang glider was light enough to fly again. On the ground, they could just make out the tiny figure of Dr. Drastic escaping Mount Humble in one of his hang gliders. He gave Zac a friendly wave goodbye. Zac and Leon soared away, high above Poison Island. A few minutes later, they touched down on the deck of an enormous ship. It was GIB's floating mission control, anchored just off the coast of Poison Island. Zac's mum and dad were waiting for them on board. "Mission accomplished, boys?" asked his dad proudly. "Uh-huh," said Zac, acting cool. His mum gave him a big sloppy kiss. "Mum," said Zac, "how could she be so tragic?" The floating mission control was linked via satellite to the mainland HQ. "Zac, do you have the formula for Solution X?" crackled a voice through the computer screen. It was GIB's Commander-in-Chief on the line. "I do, Commander," he said confidently. "It's..." "Oh no, the formula. What was it again?" Zac racked his brains. He had it. He rattled off a very long list of chemicals Dr. Drastic had added to the frog poison. Then he remembered there was one last one, critical ingredient. "Leon," he whispered. "Yep," said Leon, his lips still blue from being inside the ice block. I can't remember the last part of solution X, he admitted. That's okay, said Leon. While I was frozen, I studied Dr Drastic as he was making the formula. So that explained the look of concentration Zac had noticed on Leon's frozen face. The last ingredient is sodium chloride. Zac was amazed. Why hadn't he realised before how useful a geeky brother could be? The commander interrupted them. Good job, Leon, and especially well done to you, Zac, said Commander. Zac tried his best to look modest. Of course, everything you've told us about what happened on Poison Island must remain top secret. Escaping from quicksand, the cave-in, the piranha, everything. Zac slumped. How boring. Just because you can't boast to your friends about it doesn't make what you've done any less important, the commander said. Zac thought about it. He guessed it was true. He'd just have to get used to being an ordinary kid for a while, doing his homework and taking Espy for walks. Still, he'd have heaps of time to practice his guitar solos. Then maybe one day he'd have thousands of fans screaming his name. Now that, thought Zac, would be really cool. The end.